Imagine a city shrouded in the darkness of a freezing April night in 1945. The Second World War is nearing its end, but the fighting is more desperate than ever. In the Dutch town of Zwolle, 50,000 civilians are hiding in their basements, terrified. The streets above are crawling with hundreds of elite German SS soldiers. They have machine gun nests, armored vehicles, and orders to burn the city to the ground if the Allies attack. The Canadian Army is camped outside, waiting to shell the city with heavy artillery to destroy the enemy. But that bombardment would kill thousands of innocent people. One soldier decided that wasn't going to happen. He didn't have a tank. He didn't have a platoon. He had one eye, a machine gun, and a heart full of rage. This is not a movie script. This is the true story of Léo Major, the man who declared a one-man war on an entire German garrison.
To understand why Léo Major did what he did that night, we first have to understand who he was. Léo wasn't your typical disciplined soldier. He was a French-Canadian from Quebec, a man who seemed to be made of iron and stubbornness. By 1945, he was already a legend among his troops, but he looked more like a pirate than a soldier. He wore a patch over his left eye. A year earlier, on D-Day, a phosphorus grenade had exploded near him. Phosphorus burns don't just hurt, they eat through flesh. The doctors told him his war was over, that he was going home blind in one eye. Léo looked at the doctor and said that he only needed one eye to aim a rifle. He refused to be discharged. He put on an eye patch,
but the missing eye wasn't his only injury. Not long after the grenade incident, Léo was driving a Bren carrier when it hit a landmine. The explosion threw him into the air, and he landed hard, breaking his back in 3 places. Again, the doctors told him he would never walk properly, let alone fight. They put him in a body cast in a hospital in Belgium. But Léo Major got bored. He didn't trust the doctors, and he missed his friends. So, with a broken back, he escaped the hospital. He eventually healed himself somehow and hitchhiked back to his unit. When he arrived, his commanding officers couldn't believe their eyes. A man with one eye and a broken back was standing there demanding a weapon. This level of grit is important to remember because what happens in Zwolle wasn't just bravery, it was pure, unstoppable willpower. Fast forward to April 13th, 1945. The Canadian Army is sitting on the outskirts of Zwolle. The commanding officer calls for 2 volunteers. The mission is essentially suicide. They need 2 men to sneak into the city at night, map out the German firing positions, and radio back. The plan was that once the Canadians knew where the Germans were, they would launch a massive artillery strike to wipe them out. Léo stepped forward immediately. His best friend, a corporal named Willie Arsenault, stepped up right beside him. Willie and Léo were inseparable. They had fought through the beaches of Normandy, through the mud of Belgium, and into the heart of the Netherlands together. They accepted the mission, but they made a pact. They decided they weren't just going to scout the city. They were going to try and capture it. Just the 2 of them.
The sun went down and the weather turned miserable. It was cold, raining, and pitch black, perfect for a stealth mission. Léo and Willie crept through the fields, moving like ghosts. They reached the edge of the city, avoiding the main roads. They knew the German sentries would be nervous, shooting at any shadow that moved. They managed to slip past the first line of defense, entering the quiet cobblestone streets of Zwolle. The city felt dead. Windows were shuttered tight. The only sound was the rhythm of German jackboots marching on the pavement blocks away. They moved deeper, cover to cover, their Sten guns ready. They were close to the train station when their luck ran out. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the crack of a German machine gun. They had been spotted. Leo and Willie dove for cover, but it was too late for Willie. He was hit. Leo returned fire instantly, silencing the German gunner, and crawled over to his friend. Willie Arsenault, the man who had survived the worst of the war beside him, was dying in the wet mud of a foreign city. He breathed his last breath there in the dark. Leo sat there for a moment. He didn't feel fear. He didn't feel the cold rain anymore. Something inside him snapped. The sadness evaporated, and in its place came a cold, burning rage. He took Willie's Sten gun, slung it over his shoulder along with his own, and grabbed Willie's bag of grenades. Most soldiers would have retreated. They would have gone back to the commander and said the mission was compromised. But Leo was done following orders. He was angry. He decided right then and there that he wasn't going to map the German positions for the artillery. He was going to take the city himself. He was going to punish the entire German garrison for killing his friend. He stood up, alone, against an army of hundreds of SS soldiers. His plan was madness. He wanted to make the Germans believe they were under attack by a massive Canadian force. He started running through the streets. The first thing he encountered was a German staff car driving down the road. Leo didn't hide. He stepped out into the open and ambushed it. He captured the driver and an officer. Now, here is where Leo's psychological warfare began. He spoke fluent French, but he had learned enough German to be dangerous. He pressed the cold barrel of his gun against the officer's head and told him a lie. He said, "The Canadian artillery is aiming at the city right now. My regiment is surrounding you. If you don't leave, you will all die." He told the officer to run back to his commander and deliver the message. The Canadians are here. He let the officer go, knowing that fear spreads faster than fire. After releasing the officer, Leo began his rampage. He started running from street to street, behaving like a madman. He would fire a burst from his machine gun in one alley, throw a grenade into a garden, and then sprint 2 blocks over to fire again. He was making so much noise that the Germans in the barracks woke up in a panic. They heard machine gun fire coming from the north, then the south, then the east. In the confusion of the dark and the rain, they couldn't see that it was just one man running in circles. They thought the entire Canadian army was invading the city from all sides. Leo moved like a phantom. He found a group of 10 German soldiers on patrol. Before they could raise their rifles, Leo was on them. He disarmed them, took them prisoner, and marched them out of the city limits to the Canadian lines. He handed the prisoners over to the shocked Canadian sentries, who asked, surprised, "Where is the rest of your company, Major?" Leo didn't answer. He just turned around and ran back into the city. He wasn't done yet. He went back into the hornet's nest. He did this not once, not twice, but nearly 10 times throughout the night. Back inside Zwolle, chaos was taking over. The German officer Leo had released had told his superiors that a massive force was attacking. The Germans were starting to pack up, but there were still SS units ready to fight. Leo found their headquarters, the Gestapo office. This was the symbol of their oppression. He kicked the door in, killed the guards, and set the building on fire. As the flames rose high into the night sky, they illuminated the city. The locals, peeking from their curtains, saw the Gestapo building burning and felt a glimmer of hope. The Germans saw the fire, and panic set in. At one point, Léo encountered a group of 4 SS soldiers trying to set up a machine gun nest. He charged them. He was screaming commands in French to an imaginary platoon behind him. "Move up! Flank them!" The Germans, thinking they were about to be overrun by a squad, hesitated. That hesitation cost them their lives. Léo eliminated the threat and kept moving. He was exhausted. His back, the one that had been broken months ago, was screaming in pain. His one good eye was straining in the darkness. But every time he thought about stopping, he remembered Willie lying in the mud, and he kept running. The night wore on. It was 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Léo had been fighting for hours. He was throwing grenades into empty bunkers just to make noise. He was firing at streetlights to create darkness. The German commander in the city was convinced that they were losing. He ordered a full retreat. The mighty German army, terrified of this ghost regiment, started to pull out. Trucks, tanks, and infantry began fleeing across the bridge away from the city. They were running away from one man. But there was one final confrontation. Léo stumbled upon an SS hideout near the town hall. By now, he was almost out of ammunition. He had scavenged weapons from the soldiers he defeated. He burst into the hall, looking like a demon from hell, mud-covered, bloodied, with an eye patch and a burning hatred. The remaining SS soldiers were so demoralized by the night of chaos that they surrendered without a fight. Léo marched another group out. The city was beginning to feel different. The shooting had stopped. The engine noises of the German trucks were fading into the distance. Around 4:30 a.m., the first light of dawn began to touch the rooftops of Zwolle. Léo was walking down the main street. He was the only thing moving. The rain had stopped. He stopped in the center of the town square. It was eerily quiet. There were no more German patrols, no more checkpoints. He realized the firing had stopped completely. The Germans were gone. He had done it. He had actually cleared the Sits. Léo slowly walked over to the church and rang the bells. The sound rang out across the silent city. One by one, doors began to open. The Dutch civilians who had spent years under Nazi occupation stepped out into the morning light. They expected to see a terrifying battle, tanks and destruction. Instead, they saw one exhausted Canadian soldier standing in the square. They looked around for the army that had saved them, but there was only Léo. The realization hit the townspeople. They began to cheer. They rushed towards him. Men, women, and children surrounded Léo Major. They hugged him. They kissed him. They lifted him onto their shoulders. But Léo wasn't smiling. He pushed through the crowd gently. He had one last thing to do. He walked back to the outskirts of the city, back to the muddy field where the mission had started. He found the body of Willie Arsenault. He picked up his friend and carried him back to the jeep. He had liberated the city, yes, but he couldn't save his friend. The Canadian Army advanced into the city later that morning, ready for a fight, only to find the streets filled with celebrating civilians. The commanding officer was stunned. He asked, "Who cleared this city?" The people pointed to Léo, who was sleeping in a sleeping bag in a nearby alley, utterly exhausted. He had single-handedly saved the lives of 50,000 people and prevented the destruction of their homes. For this incredible act of valor, Léo Major was nominated for the Distinguished Conduct Medal.
But here is the most Léo Major part of the story. He refused the medal. He told the commanders that the general awarding it, General Montgomery, was incompetent, and he didn't want a medal from him. He said his reward was seeing the city free. It wasn't until later that he finally accepted recognition. But his war wasn't over. Léo Major would go on to fight in the Korean War years later. And believe it or not, he did it again. In Korea, fighting for Hill 355, he and 18 men held off an entire Chinese division of 14,000 soldiers for 3 days. At one point during that battle in Korea, the enemy was so close that Léo ordered the artillery to fire directly onto his own position. He told the mortar teams, "If we are going to die, we are taking them with us." He survived that, too. He became the only Canadian in history to be awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal in 2 separate wars. But despite all these feats, his heart remained in that small Dutch town of Zwolle. For decades after World War II, Léo lived a quiet, humble life in Montreal. He didn't brag. He didn't seek fame. To his neighbors, he was just a grumpy old man with an eye patch. They had no idea they were living next to a god of war. But Zwolle never forgot him. While he was anonymous in Canada, in the Netherlands, he was a legend. Every year, the children of Zwolle were taught the story of the one-eyed liberator. In his later years, Léo returned to the city. The reception was overwhelming. Thousands of people lined the streets, the children and grandchildren of the people he saved that rainy night in 1945. They named a major avenue after him, Léo Major. When he walked those streets again, he wasn't the angry young soldier avenging his friend anymore. He was a hero who saw that his rage had actually birthed peace. He saw families living freely in the houses he refused to destroy. Léo Major passed away in 2008 at the age of 87. He died as he lived, on his own terms. His story teaches us something profound about war and humanity. Usually we think of battles being won by generals looking at maps or by massive armies clashing with tanks. But sometimes history is changed by just one person who decides that they have had enough, one person who refuses to accept the odds. Léo Major didn't liberate Zwolle because he was ordered to. He did it because he was angry, he was heartbroken, and he was brave. He showed the world that even in the darkest nightmare of war, a single spark of will can burn down an entire empire. So the next time you think you are too small to make a difference, remember the man with one eye and a broken back who took on an army to save a city he didn't even know. History is full of forgotten heroes, but Léo Major is one name that should never fade away.